People with weird, obscure jobs. What is your job and how did you get the job? My first job was an employee for Netflix, back when streaming was still a newer thing and they primarily mailed DVDs out. The job itself was to sit in a warehouse, opening the envelopes and checking the discs for damage. Since the job involved opening mail and sending it back out, it meant I had to be at work at 3 a.m. when the truck carrying the previous day's mail came in. Apparently, this was an obscure job because I've had to convince every job interviewer I've talked to in the last 10 years since I worked there that yes, that's a real job that existed, and that if I was trying to pad my resume with fake jobs, I'd pick more convincing ones. I got the job through a temp service. My second job was at a local wreath-making business run out of a guy's house in the woods in the middle of nowhere. The owner was an old hippie and he had a small room at the back of his one shed with grow lights in it that he was very insistent we not look in. Considering he also had a sizable greenhouse and foraged a lot of his plants from the woods, well, worked legally, I was a paid volunteer. I got that job because my brother was working there and put in a good word to the boss. I lost that job because I was awful at it. Technically, I still had the job longer than my brother, who was fired an hour earlier because he was a 16-year-old who wanted to go hang out with his girlfriend instead of work. When I was fired, the boss told me, "Your brother was amazing at the job but had a crappy work ethic. You had an amazing work ethic but was terrible at the job. I wish I had an employee with your brother's skill and your work ethic." I took it as a compliment, my brother less so, but now he's a boss that has to deal with lazy teenagers. So what I'm saying is that part of the reason I was unemployed for so long was because my first two jobs were both obscure and seemed fake. Well, I guess Netflix and chill takes on a whole new meaning for him. Story 2. I'm in here pretty late. I guess I'm a grass reviewer. I moved to Washington after grass became legal. I worked for Apple, so my job moved with me pretty well. I started smoking a lot, taking crappy pictures of it, but writing really good reviews. Sooner or later, the pictures got better and the reviews became articles. I taught myself a bunch of things through YouTube. I created a low-effort, high-effort site and started reviewing legal stuff that I bought. Soon, I was making composites with logos, and those were nice. Then someone asked me to take money for smoking their stuff and taking pictures. Along the way, I've run advertising and social media for dozens of brands, including the #1 retailer, #3 when we met, and #1 producer/processor of grass in Washington based on sales. I've worked with multiple state-licensed testing labs and the biggest grass business convention in the U.S. My articles and photos have been in business, trade, and consumer magazines. Brands I was doing advertising for won Dope Cup Awards 11 times in 3 years. One time, I was the only respondent on record regarding residual solvents in grass extracts, and my input changed the proposed rulings. A lot of it was just being places, going on my own and others' is social media, and giving praise where due. I lost a couple actual clients for being honest and gained a lot of credit for being legit, which led to more folks accessing my content for impartiality. Money doesn't influence the reviews, so sponsors get it when they have a bad product or foreign matter or BS numbers on the label. Over the years, I've learned enough about the players in the industry that I basically didn't run into that often past the first year. A big part of building it was traveling. I would be all over Washington every week for 3 years straight. Over 5 years, I've published about 30,000 social media pieces across 6 of my own main Instagram and Facebook accounts. I had a big social media purge hit me in 2016 and again in 2018. I shared, I think, 11,000 tweets in my first 3 years, but I gave up on that platform. 350-ish YouTube videos got deleted when my account got canceled for posting content pre-COPPA. That hit me hard, and I didn't do anything other than white label work for a while. I've been reworking the 50 episodes of my podcast featuring people in the industry, reposting some of my older content, and have a couple of new channels where I share content as well. Most of what I do these days is white label advertising, as it were. Although I did just do my first lecture in February on the 10,000-year history of humans and I have the first new episode of my podcast in 3 years recorded. So basically, I get paid to smoke and talk about and take pretty pictures and share on social media. It is an insane amount of work, though. Story 3. Wow, I wrote a really long post that will get buried, but maybe I'll copy/paste it whenever this topic comes up next. My title at work is Technical Supervisor, and I work for a TV production company. The title itself isn't that unique, but I doubt there are that many people who have as varied a job as me. During my entire career, I've done camera work, editing, writing, directing, translation, graphics design, animation, visual effects, color grading, mastering, audio mixing, vision mixing, workflow design, and technical design for TV and film productions, in addition to working as a driver, a runner, a production assistant, and a technical consultant. I've also done web design and programming before I could support myself fully with TV/film work. Oh yeah, and I've been a visiting lecturer to 2 different universities and a vocational school. In my current job, I may be asked to fill in to do most of the things I've done before in my career at a moment's notice. Literally, in the same week, I might go through our technical budget, sit in for a job interview for a new hire, teach an edit assistant how to use a piece of software, write an automation tool to improve a workflow, edit a show's opening titles, color grade an episode of a different show, edit a different show still, do animation or graphic design, mix and master a podcast, and more. Early in my career, I had an interview for a now bankrupt company. Their CEO told me they don't hire people who have no specialty, when I told him I'm literally interested in everything. Since then, I've made knowing a little bit about everything my career. I've always seemed interested in how things work, and then trying to figure out how to make them work even better. I got my current job by luck and timing. I had an easy, well-paying job with less responsibility before. I saw a company was looking for a person for a job similar to what mine is now, but literally thought it was too much of a bother to write an application and update my CV. My friend ended up getting hired for that job and changing companies, so he recommended me for my current position. I was asked for an interview and hired a week or so later. Didn't have to write an application, only sent in a link to my LinkedIn instead of updating my actual CV. Story 4. I spent a year on a team reclassifying the Duke University library system from Dewey Decimal to Library of Congress. Had to learn like 4 different alphabets just to label them properly. Duke University has one of the largest research libraries in the world with millions of books. In addition to the main library, we went through engineering, biology, art, and divinity. There was also another main library on East Campus. The whole operation took about 2 years, I think. I was there from December 2006 to February 2008 when the project ended. The Dewey Decimal System works perfectly well for small American libraries that cater to an English-speaking Judeo-Christian populace. The Library of Congress system is more egalitarian and perhaps more importantly has unassigned sections for disciplines that have not yet been discovered. Large university libraries and other world-class collections are better served by the LOC system. I don't quite remember the number of people on our team, but it was about 15 of us doing the physical labor. We were a company that did contract work for libraries. We mostly labeled books, scanned barcodes, and reshelved. The reason I learned those alphabets was because we had to meet production and the barcode sheets only used the Latin alphabet. Most of the time, the barcodes on the book and the labels match, but sometimes they didn't or were missing altogether, and then you'd have to waste precious time figuring out what was going on. I'd scope ahead when we were about to hit a section in another writing system to make sure I was prepared. Story 5. Mine isn't necessarily weird, but how I fell into it was. Around 10 years ago, I was working in the IT industry. I decided to help my dad out one weekend selling hunting gear at a Militaria expo, basically antique military gear and army disposal. One of the sellers had a vampire termination kit. Knowing very little about antiques at the time, I pulled out each piece, checking them over. The story checked out, did some research on my phone throughout the day, and found out that it could be a fake in 2 ways. It could be a kit put together by someone out of antique pieces to make it seem real. And technically, even if it was authentic, it was a Victorian fake. With the fear of vampires in the late 19th century, con men put together vampire termination kits and sold them to rich businessmen visiting Europe. What stood out to me, though, was the main reason I bought it. In the middle of the kit was a crucifix with an ivory inlay that doubled as a goddamn percussion weapon. Long story short, I took a chance and spent $1,000 on it and got persecuted by my father for such a dumb move. I didn't have much in my savings at the time. I took it to Ripley's Believe It or Not in Australia, and they flew someone out from the US to look at it, which was pretty exciting. Within 5 minutes of looking at it, they offered me a ridiculous sum of money for what I thought was a large investment to begin with. While in ways I do regret selling the kit, it allowed me to start a career in the antiques trade. 5 years later, I moved to the UK to study a degree, and now I specialize in rare, obscure antiques that have allowed me to travel all around the world sourcing new, weird objects. P.S. Don't worry, I gave my dad a cut of the vampire kit profits for believing in me. Now, this story just goes to show that you should never underestimate the value of a good story and a little bit of luck, and maybe a healthy dose of dumb decisions too. Story 6. I'm a Chiron operator. I trigger motion graphics on live TV. I was an art student and also in a stage crew in high school. These things got me jobs backstage and theater, which got me a job in TV doing normal stuff like cameraman and stuff like that. Since I was an art major, I asked if I could do graphics, and they let me on the weekends, and my specialty eventually turned into the Chiron, which ingests the graphics that artists make and plays them back through the switcher that controls the news broadcast. It's not technically an art position, but at my job specifically, I could make the graphics in After Effects and Photoshop during the day if I have a computer free, and in the afternoon I play the Chiron. Usually you are one or the other because Chiron operators don't need art skills. It's just another tech job like audio operator or camera operator or stage manager or whatever. These kinds of jobs are getting rarer because they are being automated, but since I'm also an artist, I get to keep my job because if someone leaves, I can take their job. Story 7. I'm an assistant curator in numismatics. Basically, I manage our museum's collection of ancient coins. It's a small museum, which explains why I even have this job as I'm not a professional numismatist. But we have a pretty sizable collection of mostly Roman coins, but we also have Greek, Hellenistic, Byzantine, medieval European, Chinese, Islamic, and Crusader Kingdom coins. I catalog coins, appraise them, do any research that is required, and help incorporate coins into our exhibits. I also do educational outreach, so I hold workshops for our volunteers and the public. I work with professors in the history and archaeology departments of the university we're attached to in order to help them incorporate numismatics into their curricula. Basically, I came to university and decided to volunteer with the museum because I like history. I did tech support for the first year, and then the director asked me if I would like to train in numismatics. I said sure. 5 years later, here I am managing the collection, full-time in the summer and part-time during the academic year. Story 8. For 4 years, I was a fake priest in Japan. I first worked for a company making $90 to $100 for a 15-minute ceremony. When I found out I could cut out the middleman, I started on my own and started making $200 a wedding. I remember one day I had 6 weddings back to back and made $1,200 in a day. This was huge back when I was living on an English teacher's salary in Japan. It was so much fun. The brides were more than often super hot, and so were many of the guests. I felt like Jesus, but kind of dirty. There was one time when the Japanese family was actually Christian, and they freaked me out when they actually started singing along with our hymns. I had to remember not to make the Catholic cross gesture because I was dressed like a Protestant. It really threw me off my game. One time I had to read a scripture in Dutch. I told the organizer that I don't speak Dutch, and they told me just to make it up, so I went full Swedish chef, and everyone loved it. It was definitely one of the coolest and easiest money jobs I've ever had. I also got huge discounts and free parking at the hotel I worked at, along with free bento lunches each day I worked. 10 out of 10 would do it all over again. Story 9. I analyze satellite imagery for the government, but not quite in the way you may think. Instead of a foreign target assessment, I look at U.S. crops. When a farmer has a loss and files an insurance claim that is subsidized by the U.S. government, we need to ensure the claim is legitimate and that tax dollars are not being wasted. We also do damage assessment after catastrophic weather events. We use weather data, multispectral satellite imagery, aerial imagery, production data, site visits, and so on. If there is enough evidence, we build a case, then hand it off to the Office of the Inspector General and U.S. Attorney's Office. It is different from day to day. I get to learn about a lot of different crops and get out and about, see where our food comes from, and meet a lot of good producers. Story 10. I manage a motel and marina in a vacation town in Wisconsin. We're directly on a large lake, and we're popular because golf around here is good, and we offer a free boat slip to any guests with boats. So fishermen and boaters can keep their boats on the water throughout their stay. It's not very common to have a motel that does this. I got the job because my parents live in the area, and they sent me a photo at the job listing. It said the manager gets to live for free on the lake in an expensive town in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. I have 2 associate's degrees in IT, but I did it out of practicality and not passion. I have an appointment to take my drone Part 107 test, and I want to start my own drone business. I also get to take our rental pontoons out when I have some free time. Work is crazy in the summer, but in the off-season, it's so slow and I have a lot of downtime, which is nice. My boss is great and doesn't helicopter. The pay isn't amazing at $25,000 a year, but since I don't have to pay rent, mortgage, or utilities, I do pretty well, and during the virus, I had the job security and steady pay, so I was very fortunate. Story 11. I worked as a game master or GM for an obscure MMORPG title that had 99.9% of gamers won't know because honestly it was a small crap game from a crap developer. I got the job from applying to a job posting on Indeed from a publisher that had just purchased the IP for the game for the North American market. My job initially was localizing the game from start to finish from Korean to English, while localizing things like monsters, NPCs, town's characters, items, and skills were all easy and fun. Localizing the quests was a pain in the back and very time-consuming. I'd say it was more akin to translating a book than a video game. We worked from multiple Excel files that were often tens of thousands of lines long, so you can imagine, localizing a MMO from start to finish is no small feat, and our game wasn't even a big title like World of Warcraft. After the game was fully localized and launched, I then transitioned into the role of GM. Being a GM is exactly what you'd expect, and it was hella fun being able to literally play God in the game. I remember equipping my secret account with godly gear and just PKing the crap out of players we didn't like, mostly cheaters, gold buyers, and just BM schmucks, lol. Remember guys, the GM or GMs are always around you and we're just invisible and choose not to show ourselves. Story 12. My job basically boils down to finding cool stuff and selling it on eBay. I work for a recovered rich hoarder selling the stuff he collected over years. We have multiple buildings dedicated to stuff piled upon top of other stuff. Even worse, a lot of expensive items are just sitting out open to the elements. Most of the things are expensive test instruments that would make old-time synth users drool. I've found musical instruments, factory equipment, cars, even medical equipment. Whatever it is, we clean it up, take photos, document it, and post it on various selling outlets and auction sites, including Facebook Marketplace. That place is utter hell. I found the job through Indeed. The pay was great for our area, and they even offered a sign on bonus, which is again unheard of in our small town. I got the job because the manager liked me more than the guys they interviewed, and I had a can do attitude when they showed me the literal massive amounts of items I'd be cataloging. Story 13. Not quite as interesting as other things I read, but I know my job is weird even for those I work with constantly. I'm a social worker in the care of the mentally and or physically disabled. I do tons of things. No day is the same, really. But I'm really the guy who gets to hang around everywhere and listen and make sure everybody involved in a client situation is happy and chasing the same goals. That's not really something you can measure, so I get why some of my coworkers don't really know what I do. I also do lots of paperwork, like just did the taxes for about 50 people. Best part of my job is working with a family and getting someone, old or young, into a situation where they receive full-time residential care with us, lightening the load on the family and often providing a more stable/intensive environment for the person with a disability. I rolled into it by choosing a major during the last day of enrollment, was on benefits at the time and supposed to look at working options, did not like that and enrolled. Got lucky that the lady at the benefits office was understanding about my desire to learn. Really enjoyed my internship in a facility for the disabled and really just never left. Got the job because someone got pregnant. Story 14. Not me, but my son-in-law has an interesting job. 5 days a week, he drives a refrigerated truck all over our county and 2 neighboring counties to veterinary offices and some farms to pick up deceased pets and livestock, usually cats, dogs, horses, and a variety of other small animals. These were beloved pets of the owners, and he brings them back to where he works. They have the only animal crematorium in 3 counties. He then prepares them for cremation and afterwards boxes the ashes for delivery back to the clients, or put them in chosen urns, etc. He is a very respectful and empathetic man, even when the families are not present. He is respectful and gentle throughout the process, treating them as if they were his own. Even though some days he is allowed to wear jeans or t-shirts because he is working alone, he never has. He always wears his iron proper uniform out of respect to the families. He's a good man, and even though he is only 32 and a muscular 6 feet tall, he has a perfect soft-spoken attitude that people trust. He's awesome. Story 15. I have a cool, interesting call center job that I love even though I take minimum wage, and these days that is obscure. I had a friend who I knew from school, and he said he just found a job in IT, so I sent him a message congratulating him and was quite interested in the job since I like IT. He went on to say, "Want me to ask if there's any more openings?" Of course, I say yes. I spent a day working on my CV, even though I have no qualifications and no experience, and then send my friend the CV asking, "Will this be okay?" He says that he will edit the CV, and the edit I send it off and got an interview, and 2 days later I get a phone call, asked me to start. The weird part is about 2 years after starting, one of the people interviewing me says, "We've only brought you in because it's the worst CV we have ever seen and wanted to meet you. We only hired you because you aced the technical test and couldn't pass you up." 6 months after starting, the guy who got me the job went on the sick for a fact illness and got fired the first decent chance they had. I'm still there with 7 accounts under my belt at one point, having the best time. And if you're enjoying the video too, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 16. Recently, I started work for a removal and transportation company that is contracted out to dozens of funeral homes in the area. Basically, upon someone's passing, the family makes arrangements with a funeral home. I then get a text with an address and show up to load the deceased in the van and deliver it to the prospective funeral home. I'm just graduating from college and had a job offer lined up that was ultimately pulled due to the I picked this job up when my bartending job in my college town laid workers off in March. Found this work through a family friend to keep some money coming in for the last couple of months I was in school. Thought this was going to be a temporary gig until I started full-time after school. I know it is a stretch, but I like to tell people I work as an undertaker. Yes, it did bother me the first couple of times. Money was good, so I stuck around. Now I'm fairly comfortable and it's simply easy money. My one pet peeve is when my coworkers will refer to our, quote, cargo by their first name. Something just doesn't sit right about, "Hey, after we drop Jeffrey off, do you want to stop for coffee?" Story 17. I bend steel. You would think the job was easy by looking at it, but the reality is that literally everything is a variable from material type, material thickness, tooling selection to the actual material crystalline structure. Not only that, but all the math is just to get you close. Combine that with the fact that many parts need holes in a specific spot after forming, and you'll begin to understand why nearly all holes are slotted. I work in a job shop doing work for everyone from John Deere to Bobcat to medical structures to bending magnesium alloy armor plate. That crap is unpredictable in bending. The trade has a need for everyone from no knowledge to excessive knowledge. You can do everything from just pushing a pedal to neutral selection and blank fabrication. And it's an ending trade, not from lack of need, but lack of people willing to do it. Story 18. I used to maintain 40s, 50s era trains at a railroad museum attraction, only paid $10 an hour, but incredibly fun and unpredictable work, and they taught me just about everything I needed. Since I was half the age and size of the other volunteers and slash employees, I often had to crawl around inside the engines to undo bolts in weird spots or worm my way under the locomotives to grease things or replace motor brushes. I actually found the place by Google searching out of desperation and didn't even know there was a train museum near me. I'd known people elsewhere who volunteered at such places and looked into that out of desperation since I couldn't get an engineering internship for the summer, and I figured hands-on experience like that was the next best thing. I was originally a volunteer but became a paid part-time employee come fall because they were having trouble getting reliable labor, and knew I was a hard worker and small. Would definitely recommend it if you're interested in mechanical things but have zero experience, and or if you just love trains. Just be prepared to get really greasy and dirty. Story 19. I'm a cashier slash receptionist at a club, or at least I was It's both an odd job and how I got it was kind of odd too. I do stuff like collect cover, make change for dancers slash waitresses slash patrons, check in dancers and collect their fees. I do coat check and run VIP room transactions in different places around the club. I make minimum wage, which is $15 where I live, and a crapload of tips on top of it on a good night, which is nice because my shifts are 10 hours in heels and full makeup dealing with schmucks constantly. I ended up getting this job because my friend was trying to convert me to Buddhism. She kept dragging me to meetings, the food was good, but it otherwise did nothing for me. And there I met a woman who happened to be a cashier at a club. At the time, I worked in after-school classes and it was about to be summer, so I'd be out of a job. So I asked if they were hiring. She got me an interview, which took place during club operating hours on the show floor, weirdest interview of my life. And I was pretty and could count, so they hired me. They only hire people through recommendations due to the secrecy needed for the business, so I guess I got pretty lucky. Story 20. I used to do home automation programming. It was something I hadn't even fathomed would exist before I got the job since I grew up lower class. These are basically systems that integrate home lighting, HVAC, audio, video, distribution, security, and surveillance, and a lot more. All controllable from a phone or wall-mounted touchscreens. The systems could range from simply turning some TVs on and routing audio to some speakers to full-blown automation of the house. We had one client whose entire home had speakers everywhere, and when someone entered his driveway, it would play a chime on every speaker in the house. He could change the temperature of his in-ground pool from any touchscreen in the house, view a live feed of any of his 30-plus cameras, watch a movie in his Atmos surround 4K movie theater, so much crazy stuff. When he went on vacation, the lights would replicate patterns they learned over weeks to ensure any would-be thieves would be convinced he was still home. I got this job because I applied to run cables for the company and do some other manual labor stuff. The programmer left, and I was given a chance to fill his shoes. Not only was it fascinating to me, but I took to it quickly and did a lot of great and fun work. Story 21. I have always had jobs that have been hard to describe. Currently, let's put it this way, the Eastern Interconnection, the power grid that connects most of the eastern half of the United States, is essentially one big machine, frequently called the largest machine in the world. You flip a switch in your house, a signal is sent, those signals become aggregated, and giant spinning turbines somewhere else respond to your need for power. Your switch and whatever device you're powering is part of that machine. In many states, that machine is market-based, meaning nearly every action is based on supply and demand meeting at a lowest price point, so the machines are responding not to your direct need, but to their opportunity to make money from your need. The machine and the markets are so complicated and so constantly evolving that there are a couple hundred people whose jobs are to continually work on the rules for the operation of that machine and to determine how payments flow. I'm one of those people who works on the rules. How I got to that point is a longer story, but generally people in these roles have some sort of background in regulatory work, ensuring compliance from one side or another. Story 22. And unfortunately, probably after too, I inspected restaurants for a multinational chain. Essentially, I was there to enforce compliance with the franchisee contract. However, that involves inspecting a 125-item checklist. Some items have multiple issues that can be facets of one violation. The job was called field consultant and has now become business consultant because we were supposed to be swinging away from inspecting, making sure product is prepared properly, correcting ad materials, ensuring proper food safety protocols, etc., to actual consulting, trying to make the franchisees and thus the company more money. This is one of those background jobs people don't even know exists until I tell them what I do. Then they're like, oh yeah, that is a job that would exist, isn't it? I never tell anyone what company I work for. It raises specific uncomfortable questions and starts conversations I don't want to be a part of. It's a lot of emotional labor too. Most of the franchisees are incompetent due to a massive push by the company to open as many restaurants as humanly possible in every market on the planet. This resulted in people who should not be trusted with a potato suddenly running a very complicated business with razor-thin margins in direct competition with other restaurants of the same chain, cannibalizing each other's possible profit after less than 2 weeks of training. This leads to my job mostly being talking to sad, angry, frustrated, depressed immigrants. I have about 25 I'm responsible for, who either flushed away their life savings trying to live the American dream or took out massive loans for the same purpose. Everyone who does this job for this company is miserable. We're also paid below the market average for the job. I got the stupid job working my way up from minimum wage to this corporate position. I'm the only person I know of in the company who did. We were all laid off at the beginning of April. I'm making more on unemployment than I did doing the job. They're like, when we call people to come back, we're calling you first. Because I have seniority and I keep my franchisees quiet, I'd rather they just call me back last. After the layoffs, they asked us to keep answering emails and phone calls and crap. I was like, nah, man, that's a large percentage of the job. Any work I do while laid off can mess up my benefits, so talk to you later. As far as I know, only one other person in my territory said this too. The rest are essentially still working. Half the shops in my territory have closed. Many will never reopen. It's going to be a nightmare after I get rehired. Story 23. Permit writer. I work for the EPA and write permits for companies that pollute the air, set limits on how much contaminants the company can emit, require the company uses certain control equipment, etc. You might first think of steel mills and stuff like that, which obviously, yes, we do regulate. But we also regulate things like bakeries. I got to tour a bread factory recently to look at their equipment, and OMG, it smelled so good. I became interested in this type of field mostly because I did an internship while I was in college with an environmental group that was auditing my state's Department of Natural Resources for their lack of oversight on the oil and gas wells they regulate. In my state, the EPA contracts out the DNR and city government for some of their regulation needs. I went through all the permits that were written and created reports on all the violations that should have been issued but weren't. Now I'm on the other end writing the actual permits, and it's quite different, but it's still pretty fun. Story 24. During my senior year of high school, my school opened up this brand new radio broadcasting class. I was raised in the middle of nowhere, so when my family went anywhere, we'd only listen to cassette tapes or oldie stations. I somehow managed to figure out how a song can lead into another, themes, etc. While me and one of my buddies wound up with an hour-long show after school just for crap and giggles. We had a really low-power transmitter, but I eventually learned later that we actually had the majority of listeners in the tiny area we could reach. Eventually, a family member was doing a remote to promote his store, and he mentioned who I was to the DJ that was there doing the spot. I wound up with a 5-hour show on weekend mornings. This is a big slot because that is the prime time for radio. People listen to radio when they're getting ready, driving to and from work. And I was the earliest DJ in town to give the snow report, major ski resort town. So when I was in high school, I worked for a year for one of the big name stations in my area. So I'm guessing his crap and giggles show had a surprisingly high mature audience rating. Story 25. I'm not sure if my job is not normal, but here it goes. I work and maintain industrial batteries and high-frequency chargers. These batteries are roughly 4.5 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet on average, but varies in size. They weigh around 4,000 pounds, and sometimes I have to weld on them, which is dangerous. I work with acid daily. I get to travel every day and see interesting places and manufacturers. This one that stuck with me was in Kentucky. They made headlights and taillights for new Ford vehicles. Not a soul in the place, completely automated. The forklifts all followed special lines on the ground and had lasers everywhere so they could see. I got the job through a hiring agency. They just came across it and it kind of matched my mechanics background, and I put it in my resume. It's a very good company that takes care of us. A really cool benefit that we get is birthday pay. I've never known about a job doing this, but we can take our birthday off and get paid or work that day and get double pay. Pretty cool. Story 26. Not my current job, but I had a summer job sanding bowling lanes. There are only a couple of companies in the US that do it, so we covered much of the East Coast based on Massachusetts. Alleys get sanded every few years and usually during the summer when business is slow. My cousin's boyfriend was the foreman and mentioned they were looking for summer help, so me and 2 of my friends from college signed up. We drove up and down the East Coast in trucks the size you would rent to move. We usually worked 18-hour days with 1 or 2 days off per month. Even driving between sites was tough because I had to sit in the crevice between 2 bucket seats the whole time. It was a hard physical labor. At one point, we got behind and put in a 35-hour shift with no breaks. It was brutal. At the end of the summer, one of the other crews was doing a screen job where you don't level the lane, you just put a fresh coat of lacquer on it. You are supposed to use a water tank on the machine so that no sparks kick up and set the lacquer tank on fire. But that makes it a lot heavier, so sometimes they skip it. The machine has a T-bar handle that you belt yourself in so you can use your back to back up instead of pulling with your arms. This one kid was working under the pin setter without a water tank when he hit a spark and his machine blew up. He panicked and couldn't get out of his belt. My friends and I finished out the summer, but we never went back. I don't know what happened to him. This was during the infancy of the internet and before cell phones and all that. But whenever I thought about quitting school because it was just too hard, I remembered what real hard actually is. Story 27. I guess you could say I'm an advisor to the guy that owns my company that I've known pretty much my entire life. Long story short, his parents worked for my dad years back and he wanted to start his business after he graduated college. My dad let him and his brother set up shop in a spare office room and helped him out getting everything up and running. I started with an entry-level position and got some hands-on experience and slowly worked my way up. On the production side of things, the hours were long and it was very stressful, but the pay was exceptional. Talked with him a few times about how it might just not be what I wanted to do, and he offered me this current job. Less hours and stress, but the pay reflects that since I really don't do anything that makes the company money. All I do is sit in on meetings all day, take notes, ask some questions to better understand what's going on, and report back to him and the top leadership team. Even though I make about 50% of what my previous pay was, the less hours and stress is 100% worth it. Story 28. I've had a couple of really cool and uncommon jobs, including mold maker, basically mixed and poured silicon molds for various props, decorations, and replicas. Honestly, most of what I did was make replicas for museum displays so the real object didn't get damaged by grubby little kid fingers. I did work on a series of movie props for a small indie film once. That was pretty cool. Plastics fabricator, basically made things out of sheet plastic. Unfortunately, this meant making a lot of custom boat windows for gross, rich, old dudes who would make really uncomfortable comments about how hot it was that I, an early 20s woman, could use power tools. I also made display cases, sneeze guards, and fancy display cases, some of them bullet resistant. I also sold materials to hobbyist model makers and cosplay artists. Finished carpenter. The job title wasn't anything fancy, but I worked exclusively on high-profile museum jobs and public works exhibits. All the plywood casing and display structures you see at museums all over the world, I probably worked on a few of them. Super cool job, but unfortunately very NDA restricted. I got all these jobs simply by being good at wood shops in high school. By the time I graduated, I had a pretty decent portfolio of furniture and other items. Woodshop is a highly underrated and incredibly useful class. More schools should have it. The mold making job I got after I started making props on commission for cosplayers. I'm also a bit of a material science nerd, so I have a pretty good mastery of mixing things, silicon and resin, without having a failed reaction. The trades are cool. I currently work as an automotive service advisor. Basically, I put together jobs based on the text diagnosis, and I have the fun task of calling customers to tell them how badly they've neglected their cars and what needs to be fixed. I love my job, but holy crap, do people not take care of their vehicles? I honestly had no idea how bad the general population was at simple maintenance until I got this job. I love cars, and it makes me so upset to see how poorly people treat them. So let this be a PSA. Do the recommended maintenance when it's due, please. Neglecting it causes way more damage than you realize. Story 29. I have two. For the last 8 or so years, I have been working as an event designer/fabricator. I was also the resident muralist and specialized in hand painting large, often 40 feet by 40 feet murals to be used as dance floors. We would paint them on the back of massive rolls of linoleum flooring. The back is sort of papery. We used linoleum so we could, after covering the finished piece in painter's plastic, roll them up for transport. Each roll was 12.4 feet wide and around 200 feet long, so the larger floors had to be painted in stripes and fit together. This was especially difficult because my studio was an old house from the 1950s, and my area was 30 feet wide, so it took some maneuvering. Really fun job, and I loved it, but that industry is toxic as heck. Long hours and relatively crap pay for the amount of previous art knowledge needed. I had to be a jack of all trades, and I mean in a week, I could be a carpenter using spray paint, airbrush, HVLP spray gun, a foam carver. We had half-scale foam Easter Island heads, straight painting, large-scale printing, and of course, my specialty. Crap isn't boring, that's for sure, but incredibly long hours for like $15 an hour. You burn out quickly. Most people don't last more than 2 years. I did get to do some cool celebrity weddings. Wiz Khalifa and Amber Rose's wedding was cool, and also Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union's wedding. Wild crap, most of our full-scale jobs ran $1 million plus. Crazy times. My current new career is a full 180, and I'm now working as an edible oil refinery operator. I, and a team of course, run a refinery refining pretty much all the oil used in most processed foods. Palm oil, soybean, aka vegetable oil, lecithin, peep the ingredients on basically any candy bar it's in there, and vegetable shortening. The process is absolute nonsense, including crazy strong caustic soda, an assortment of acids, bleaching clay, still not fully sure what that actually is, and the craziest, a massive tower around 100 feet tall, called a deodorizer that operates at 1 atmosphere. That is almost an absolute vacuum. Crap is wild, to say the least, and pays a crap ton more, starting with zero experience than any other job I've done. The hours are crazy, alternating shift schedules, 12 hours per shift. But damn, is it interesting, fun, and pretty good money. And if you learned a thing or two from these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.